review today. We're going to start with the scientific rev. Okay. Now, the eras that come before it, or the eras that overlap just a little bit, are going to be the exploration, right? Think Columbus right here, 1492, and then all of this is exploration, Dutch East India Company, all that the technology we talked about with Portugal and all this other junk, the caravel and 1,000 other things. That's going over at the same time. Also think absolutism. All right, especially right here. This is France, this is Louis XIII, and this is Louis XIV. Louis XIV dead, 1715, as we learned about in our earlier morning review. Okay, the following eras after the scientific rev, what's coming in the 1700s, one of my favorite centuries, is going to be obviously the Enlightenment, but that leads to the American Revolution, the French Revolution, imperialism, a dozen other things. So this is wedged right in an important piece. Clusters for this. Clusters for this was scientific rev. I still think everything goes back to everything goes back to humanism. Okay, humanism, and now we throw in, instead of using faith to decide how the world works, what do we use? Reason. Reason. This is our word of the day. This is our word of the day right here. All right. We're going to use it in the scientific rev. We're going to use it in the Enlightenment. The College Board uses it in its key concepts above: reason and rationality. All right. What's the big thing produced during the scientific revolution? Right, the scientific method. I think that comes still back to humanism, the power of the individual, the power of virtue. Scientific method is all based on observation, not religion. Right? You could also throw in the word patronage up here. A lot of these scientists like Newton, like Kepler, like Brahe, the only reason they can be scientists is there's this new group of princes that actually want to learn about it. That's patronage. And then finally, the one that we see in almost every of our timelines is what? Status quo. Challenge. Status. This time, the scientific rev is going to be attacking what old world thing the most? The church. All right. The Enlightenment that comes next is going to challenge the church, but what does the Enlightenment really challenge? The old feudal system, politics, and the social order. All right. So they're similar, but they're really attacking different parts of society. All right. Now, scientific revolution, I think the primary point we start with is something called new science. All right, new science. Now, there's a couple different parts to new science. The early 1500s till just after the 1600s. All right. The biggest and most famous part. The biggest and most famous thing that is studied during this new science, during the early 1500s, the most revolutionary thing that is studied is what? Astronomy. Okay. Most important discovery in astronomy in this time period is going to be what about our universe? Heliocentric. Heliocentric. Okay. Now, the challenge for today is that this is probably the most names that we have in any group of chapters. All right? So, we have to basically list off, and I've only done the key concepts in the gray box. I've only done what's main. All right? We start the very first heliocentric guy, Copernicus. All right? Write down heliocentric again for him because it's so straightforward. There's not much about him you need to know. Now, I would expect you to know that heliocentric really challenges the Bible. All right? Really challenges the Bible. Copernicus never gets harassed by the Roman Catholic Church, though. Do you know why? Yeah? Boom, it was like the year he died, so there was no time to really get back to him. So he's the next major astronomer. There's a lot in the 1500s, but the next guy you really need to know, to be honest, is a big guy, is Galileo. All right? He invented the telescope. in the telescope. What did he look at? Do you remember? Moons, right? Moons of Jupiter. And his discovery was so astounding because he didn't actually empirically prove that the that the Earth, that the sun is the center. What he proved is, do you remember this? The universe isn't perfect. The discovery that Jupiter has many moons, they're different sizes, they have craters in the moon, they're not perfect, which really challenges the church and challenges the status quo. So he gets in a lot of trouble. He gets in a lot of trouble with the church. You can put moons on there, but the challenged church is most likely where he comes up in an actual context. Okay? Next guy is Johann Kepler. Kepler's a German. Kepler comes up with the laws of planetary motion. Right? What are the actual laws that affect the people, that affect the heavenly bodies, as we call them? Not religious, just up there bodies. Right? Definitely put patronage with that man. He above all else is sponsored by, it's either the Netherlands or Germany. It doesn't matter. But, he's not sponsored by the church. He's sponsored by kings out there. But if we're talking about scientists, and I'll put them in with astronomy, but if we're talking about scientists, we're talking about what most famous man of the scientific revolution? Isaac Newton. Okay? Isaac Newton. And we know his laws of gravity are his most important invention. It is the biggest challenge to the church. It's the biggest challenge to the status quo. And he's the one, you remember, who stood on the shoulders of giants. He takes all of these people's thoughts and works and really combines it into one. Do you remember why the laws of gravity are so phenomenally important? Yeah.
Is it because it says we revolve around it?
No. Good guess, though. It's because he says the same reason that Jupiter revolves around the sun is the same reason this apple falls to the ground. He says, what's out there, what's up there? It doesn't follow a special set of rules. It follows the exact same rules that affect you and I. What else did Newton did? He was involved with what calculus and stuff like that. I think that's good. All right. Other science. I would put physicians. What do physicians study? Medicine. Just say human body. The old version of the body was Galen. Do you remember? God, I forget what they're called. Galen had the four humors, right? And the only way we got sick is when one of our humors was out of balance. So you would drain some blood from this side of your body. We are moving past that. Most notably in this group is going to be, we'll start with the guy who comes later because I think he's the most important. His name is William Harvey. Harvey, like Newton, says to everybody, listen, the body is not some mythical special thing, and it's not a bunch of different systems, separate systems. The body is one continuous being that all interacts and is so delicately balanced together that it's easy to get sick. Circulation is usually good to put with him. He's the one who really says, the thing that's beating is also the thing that powers, our thoughts, right? It brings blood and oxygen to our brain. So, circulation. But he's really the Newton of physicians because he brings it kind of all together. The other guy that you need to know for the body is Vesalius. 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 He is one of the guys to first study it. We call him what's Petrarch's name? Remember Petrarch? Father of humanism. This is the father of anatomy. The father of anatomy. And if it seems like today I'm just throwing a lot of names at you, not talking about it too much, it's because all of these are in the key concepts. And I'm not trying to tell you much else than what the College Board has on there. There's more you got to know about these people, but I'm trying to make it as straightforward as possible. The third group, we'll say this is physicians and mathematicians. All right? There's a couple mathematicians and scientists. The first one is English. All right? His name is Francis Bacon. B-A-C-O-N. You remember what word goes with Bacon? Empiricism. It's not a key concept term directly, but it's so good they throw it on there every once in a while. You remember what empiricism is? Empiricism is the idea that you cannot know something, you cannot trust something unless you can see it, unless you can experience it, unless you can taste it, touch it, smell it, hear it, see it. That's empiricism. That's what defines, modern day stuff. He's one of our first steps towards what important cluster? The scientific method. Applying reason to the real world and experimentation rather than just saying it's that way because God made it that way or it's that way just because. And the mathematician for this era is Descartes. René Descartes. Some call him the warrior mathematician because he's fighting during, I think, the 30 Years' War. It comes a little later. But I don't know what to tell you other than math and philosophy, right? You could argue he's the father of modern mathematicians, or mathematics, right? But math and philosophy, Cartesian dualism, trying to look at math in new and super exciting ways. One last point. I have under New Science a couple things up here. Challenging the Bible. In part of the challenge status quo cluster, a lot of these people are supported through patronage by elites. It says elite support. Okay, they are supported by the kings and queens, especially in Central and Northern Europe. Because these new kings with a lot of money, and maybe even some of the younger guys that are coming on. What's the new classes that are coming on in the 1500s, 1600s, and 1700s with exploration? You remember? Merchants, bankers, the guilds are starting to gain power. They are starting to finance these scientists, just like we are financing the Renaissance artists in this time period. Any questions about scientific revolution? Awesome. Give me a new thing, write down Enlightenment. Enlightenment's way bigger. Different dates. Dates for the Enlightenment. One side 1700, the other side 1800. It all is in one century. And let's hope we can fit all this on one board and get done by 7:10. 1700, 1800. Clusters for the Enlightenment. What'd you put? What's the first thing I write up there?
Status quo.
No. Humanism. Right? Humanism. I would put humanism / the scientific method. Because the Enlightenment, if you had to sum it up, it's taking the scientific method that is developed in the 1600s and applying it to what? Society, humans, everyday life. That's all right. Okay? So, scientific method. Another one I have is finally. What's our word for the units? What's our key word for the whole day? Reason. Reason is overcoming faith. For that reason, you can put change status quo. Right? While the scientific revolution focused on, attacking, if you will, I think that's the wrong word, but focused on attacking the church, they will focus on the old social order, feudalism. And the most feudal Western country at this time is France. And that's one of the reasons that we end up with the Enlightenment taking the most power in France. And again, the eras that come after this, what's going to happen right here? What are we leading towards? Right? French Rev. What's our date? July 14th, storming the Bastille, 1789. And in American Rev, right? In the end of 1700s and the 1800s, we're leading towards imperialism. So we're going to start seeing classic culture and stuff like that. All of this is coming right after the Enlightenment. All right. Main factors of the Enlightenment. And let's say it's from here-ish. Enlightenment, we usually say, goes all the way up to the French Rev. Okay. The best way to explain the Enlightenment is what I just said. The scientific method, and apply it to politics, society, and religion. Right? Politics, society, and religion. We are going to change the status quo here. The biggest point for the Enlightenment, the biggest everything, is we are going to apply what? We are going to apply reason to everything. So first up, let's look at our philosophes. And let's just start with the most important. Who's the most important? Who's the most famous of all the philosophes? What does a philosophe mean? French Enlightenment thinker, right? Voltaire. Voltaire is the one who truly tries to change European society, not by offering fixes for anything. What does he do instead? He mocks and he attacks over and over and over again. He's sarcastic. He uses wit. I think the best way to explain him, you can write it down again if you want, I think it's relevant, is he's using the scientific method and reason on society, on humans. His main targets. Who's his main targets? Church or priests, nobles, and kings. And if your main target are priests, nobles, and kings, what's going to happen to you? He's a couple times he gets thrown in the Bastille, right? The old aging symbol of these guys' old feudal powers. Most of his books get censored or banned, right? So they have to be printed outside of the country and then snuck in. He was a skeptic, is another key concept word. That means he's write down skeptic for him, because I didn't teach you that all that much with him, but they may refer to him as a skeptic. Skeptic means he questions everything. He's not offering solutions, but he's attacking everything. And how does he feel about religion in general? He will look at atheist or even deism. Deism's the sense that you can, there is a God, but we can't prove it, we can't experience it. Right? So Voltaire is far and away the most important. Coming before him, my favorite, is the author of the most important book of the Renaissance. What's the most important book of the Renaissance? The book that takes all knowledge to change the way of thinking. The Encyclopédie. So no Diderot. By the way, Voltaire and Diderot, they are white key concept terms. A lot of these other guys are, pick one from a list. But these guys, they will give you a question on these two. Diderot, definitely no Encyclopédie with him, or Encyclopedia. Encyclopédie. I think you can write up under him, change the way people think. Right? That's the goal. Put it in quotes, because I copied that from the College Board. Change the way people think. And what is the underlying quality of the Encyclopédie? Why is it truly changing the way people think? Yeah. You don't have to go to the church. You don't have to use faith. You use reason. Let's not look at what should happen. Let's look at how the world actually is. Reason. And what's the term for when you don't have to use the church? Secularism. Okay? You can also throw in, I would like you to write it down, skeptic. College Board uses the term skeptic for these two. Is at the door. I believe it. That's Diderot. There's two more French guys. One is, who's the latest? The latest French guy. The radical was Rousseau. Rousseau. He comes at the very end. We're getting really close. He should probably be a little farther this way. We're getting really close to the French Rev. Rousseau is the radical, but the biggest point for Rousseau, it's very similar to John Locke. What does John Locke give the world? What idea that we love? It is tabula rasa, maybe. Okay, blank slate. But the biggest one?
Free will.
No, but you're close enough.
Pursuit of happiness.
Oh. You're so close. Natural rights. One of which, according to us, is pursuit of happiness. This concept of natural rights dominates what he says. We'll talk about natural rights more when we get to Locke. Rousseau. The only reason Rousseau is a little different, okay? The reason he's a little different is he says our actions are not only reason. Our actions in how we should act should not only be ruled by reason. We should also take into consider what? This is wild for an Enlightenment thinker. We should also take in our emotion. He says emotion is who we are. He takes John Locke's idea of a blank slate where we learn through our experiences, and he says, listen, emotion is what we have become. Emotion is our blank slate. We cannot ignore it. One last guy right here. We talked about briefly. Oh, is that everything? Yeah. Is Hume. David Hume. There's not much you need to know for him. Okay? His biggest thing is that we learn by experience. We learn by experience. So these people in blue, generally going after social and religious terms, right? The other group we look at is going to go after political. Okay? And I'll put John Locke. I'll put John Locke with this group. John Locke is writing earlier, right? He's writing in the 1600s. He's from England, but we can throw him right here and understand what he's talking about. His biggest point, besides blank slate, the bigger point is natural rights. Write it again. His biggest point is natural rights. So he focuses on the government more than everything. He comes up with a couple terms that are most important. First off, what is the goal of the government? Why does a government exist? To protect the natural rights of its citizen. Right? Government equals protect natural rights. That's a big one. What is one way he'll say, I love it. You're governed by the... Why does the government have power? Because you're governed by the consent of the people that you govern. You're governed by the consent of the people that you govern. What term is he talking about? You guys sit here and listen to what I say because you believe me and I respect you. What?
Social contract.
Social contract. Social contract is the belief that as a government, I am responsible for taking care of you. And he says primarily the social contract is about the government protecting the natural rights of individuals. Ultimately, why is Locke so important to us? Because so much of what our Constitution and our Declaration of Independence is from John Locke. He is just more of a reason that democracy comes back in full force in the very next decade, maybe more so than any other. The other guy is actually a French philosophe. Let's kill Diderot. I'm sorry, Diderot. Who's the French philosophe that talks about government? Montesquieu. Montesquieu. And unless I'm mistaken, there is only two books that the key concepts actually talk about. One is the Encyclopédie. The other is Montesquieu's book called Spirit of Laws. All right. He comes up with the three branches. He's the inspiration for the American Constitution. He wants to apply reason to government. Let's not say that you rule because God chose you. Let's say that there should be reasonable limitations and reasonable goals for government. All right, so we're applying reason to politics and government. We also need to look at one more group of people. I'll keep them with the government. Let's kill off Rousseau and Hume here. We are also going to apply this to the economy. What's the economic system that has been dominating Europe since 1516 into the 1700s? That's a government. What's the economic system? Mercantilism, right? Balance of trade. Your country's power is tied to your king's wealth. You want to have as much gold as possible. This new age reason application to the economy is going to find a father in Adam Smith. Adam Smith. Oh, they do mention a third book. Wealth of Nations. You guys remember all you need to know about Adam Smith? What's his big point? Which is, they actually don't have laissez-faire in a key concept. It's free market. Invisible hand of the market, all this stuff. This is a very liberal idea at the time. Don't let nobles and kings control everything. Just let the free market dominate. One term that I never taught you that is in the key concepts. I want to fix it now. It's called physiocracy. Physiocracy, led by a man named Turgot. Or Turgot, probably Turgot. And that is, in mercantilism, your wealth is based off what? What term did I just use? Balance of power. In mercantilism, not free market, in mercantilism, your wealth is balance of power. In physiocracy, your wealth is about, let me make sure I say this right, productive work. I know this is especially brutal because we never even talked about that, but I'm going to do what I can. All right. Let's say other terms or other ideas. How do these ideas spread? And why do they spread so well in the Renaissance? By now, we've had the printing press for a couple hundred years. Now we're printing out newspapers, pamphlets, what else? Books, duh. All right. Where are people discussing these? Salons. You might also see terms like coffee houses, academies. But this is all about the spread of knowledge. And they actually go as far to mention the encyclopédie a second time here as being the best way to spread knowledge. Now, with all of this, when we get newspapers, salons, coffee houses, books, the encyclopedia, all of which is attacking the government and nobles, what then happens? If you write a book that attacks the feudal order, what does the feudal order do? Censorship. They try to censor you. Other thoughts? And these are, I took some key concepts they had scattered about. I didn't know where to put them on a timeline. Religion is interesting because people, I would say this, people don't become less holy. A lot of people don't believe in God any less, but they're moving away from organized religion, partly because of how aggressive and political the old Roman Catholic Church has been. So religion actually becomes a lot more personal. You see in the Enlightenment era, you see a lot of different religions actually get religious freedom. A lot of different countries actually get religious freedom. Even some countries give who freedom of religion? Jews, right? That shows you how radical this time period, because people say, listen, you can worship who you want. Because even though I still believe in God, I acknowledge that because the scientific revolution is fact now, we will never prove God. I believe it's faith. But I understand in this new world, we will never prove that God fully and completely exists. And a big one is racism. Right? The era before this is exploration, maybe even absolutism before and during. The era after this, French Rev, American Rev, I think you can also say an era that comes next is imperialism. Right? Because people are exposed to so many different cultures during exploration, they are starting to try to use reason to explain why cultures are so different. And a lot of times, the white Europeans are going to come to the assumption that these other people are what? You don't want to say less developed, because that usually comes with social Darwinism, and Darwin's not to the mid-1800s, but that they are inferior in some way, right? We're applying the scientific method, and we see that they don't have as good as medicine as us, so reason would dictate that they're not as smart as we are. They're not as powerful, they're not as important, they're not as intelligent. Two final things. I mentioned it in the last unit, but let's mention it again. Enlightened despotism. Enlightened despot means a ruler. Where do you find enlightened despotism more than anywhere else? Central and Eastern Europe. One of the themes we had from our last timeline is the Holy Roman Empire is doing what? Ever since what? What starts the downfall? I'd say the Peace of Augsburg in 1555, but the Peace of Westphalia 100 years later in 1648, that is when the Habsburgs start to lose power over their country. So in the wake of the Habsburgs' failings, what country more than any other becomes powerful? Think of a map.
Russia.
Not Russia.
No, it's Prussia.
Prussia. Good. The enlightened despot there is, I think it's Joseph. No, Frederick II. There's a gray box term. If you know Frederick II, which is not. What's an enlightened despot do? He is what kind of ruler? He's an absolute monarch. Despot means he's an absolute monarch, but they try to be nice to their citizens. So what's one thing an absolute monarch, even though he can do anything, what's one thing an enlightened despot might do for his people? Biggest one? Maybe freedom of speech. Along those lines? What? Natural right. Freedom of religion. right? Even though they're absolute monarchs, they're trying to rule halfway decent. And our last point is my favorite artistic era. We don't talk about it a lot till we get to imperialism, but what's my favorite artistic era? Romantic. Romantic, with the emotion, with the sweeping stories and views, romanticism in art, in music, in literature, right? We studied that a lot around it. Romanticism really is a response to the scientific reason and straightforward approach of the Renaissance, okay? It's also a challenge to the Industrial Revolution coming later. Any questions about the Enlightenment? Thank you for coming today, guys.